What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
Imagine coming home after a long day of showing empty houses to picky buyers in the humid Ohio suburbs, your mind already drifting to the quiet evening ahead in the modest ranch-style home that your late mother left specifically to you in her meticulously notarized will, only to find the front door ajar and your brother Jack standing there in the entryway with his arms loaded down by cardboard boxes overflowing with tangled extension cords, mismatched kitchenware, and what looks like a child's half-deflated soccer ball, his wife Lisa trailing behind him lugging a bulky lamp that casts awkward shadows across your freshly vacuumed living room rug, while their two rambunctious kids, 10-year-old Tommy and 7-year-old Sarah, dart past everyone's legs kicking up dust bunnies and scattering your carefully arranged throw pillows onto the hardwood floor as if this were some chaotic family reunion you never agreed to host. Jack sets his burden down with a thud that reverberates through the walls you just repainted last spring and turns to you with that familiar cocky grin stretching across his weathered face. The one that always signaled trouble ever since you were both teenagers sharing a cramped bedroom in this very house during those lean years after your father passed away too young from what everyone whispered was stress-related heart issues tied to his endless overtime at the auto repair shop. Emily. Perfect timing, you're just in time to help unload the van, he announces casually as if announcing the weather, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand before adding with feigned nonchalance, "We're moving in this Friday." And Mom gave it her full approval before she went, saying the place should stay in the family and not go to waste sitting here with you rattling around alone since the divorce turned your life into what you always called your personal fortress of solitude. You stand there on the threshold, keys still clutched in your fist like a lifeline, feeling the weight of 2 years since Mom's funeral crash over you all at once, because you were the one who held her hand through the chemotherapy sessions and the endless doctor visits, while Jack jetted in for the last weekend only to argue over the hospital bills and the antique clock in the hallway that now ticks solemnly on your mantle as a reminder of her final wishes clearly stated in the legal document your attorney framed for emphasis during that awkward reading. Part of you wants to erupt in laughter at the sheer audacity of this man who has bounced from one dead-end job to another since high school, always showing up with sob stories about failed business ventures or unexpected layoff packages that mysteriously never included paying back the loans he sweet-talked out of Mom during her more vulnerable moments. But instead of arguing or raising your voice in the way that would only feed his narrative of you as the uptight older sister gatekeeping the family legacy, you simply nod once. Step inside past the growing pile of duffels and plastic bins that already encroach upon the space where you practice yoga every morning to shake off the frustrations of selling overpriced split levels to retirees clinging to their nest eggs. Slipping your phone from the side pocket of your sensible slacks without drawing attention, you unlock the screen and watch as the security app you installed discreetly 6 months ago after hearing about the string of porch pirate thefts in the neighborhood springs to life with a series of precise notifications. Motion sensors activated in the front yard at precisely 3:15 p.m., time-stamped video feeds capturing the van's arrival and the family's eager disembarkation, and now the interior cameras blinking online to record Tommy absent-mindedly picking at the seam of your leather couch, while Sarah climbs onto the armrest for a better view of the mounted television you rarely use anymore since streaming became your evening ritual. Trespassing confirmed flashes in bold red letters across the display, a digital confirmation of the violation unfolding in real time, and with your thumb hovering over the silent alarm icon, you feel a surge of that rare, empowering clarity amid the rising chaos because for once, after years of being the responsible one who fixed the roof leaks and paid the property taxes without complaint, you hold the tools to enforce boundaries that family ties have eroded like relentless Midwest rain on an old barn. Jack continues his monologue from the kitchen doorway, gesturing animatedly about how his latest apartment lease fell through due to some vague landlord dispute and how this move is only temporary until he lands that promotion at the warehouse where he's been loading trucks for the past decade without ever quite climbing the ladder, but you tune him out as you excuse yourself to the powder room under the pretense of freshening up, locking the door behind you and dialing The non-emergency police line with a voice kept remarkably steady despite the adrenaline pumping through your veins like the strongest cup of diner coffee. Explaining the situation to the dispatcher, who sounds jaded from handling one too many domestic squabbles on a Thursday afternoon, you emphasize the key details: the sole ownership deeded to you in Mom's will, the unauthorized entry captured on high-definition footage, and the potential for escalation given Jack's history of bending rules like they were suggestions rather than laws. Until she assures you a patrol car is en route and advises staying put without confrontation, which you have no intention of breaching anyway, because direct fights with Jack always end with you feeling like the villain in your own story. Peering through the tiny window that overlooks the driveway, you watch as Lisa unpacks a casserole dish from the van's cooler, setting it on your counter with the hopeful expression of someone trying to buy goodwill. Through home-cooked meals reminiscent of the potlucks your family hosted back when Dad was alive, and the house echoed with laughter instead of these undercurrents of resentment and entitlement. By the time the squad car's lights pierce the gathering dusk, painting the neighborhood in fleeting blue strobes that have Mrs. Jenkins next door peeking through her curtains with the curiosity of a lifelong busybody, Jack's bluster has shifted to visible unease as he cranes his neck toward the street, his earlier confidence cracking like the dry earth in your front flower bed after a summer drought. Officers Rodriguez, a sturdy man in his 40s with a no-nonsense mustache that speaks of years patrolling these quiet streets, and his younger partner Ellis, who carries the fresh-faced eagerness of a recent academy graduate, approach the door with measured steps and notebooks at the ready, and you greet them calmly, extending your phone like a prosecutor's exhibit to display the app's irrefutable evidence while recounting the sequence of events from your arrival to the alarm trigger without embellishment or hysteria. Jack attempts to interject with his side, brandishing that flimsy handwritten note he claims proves Mom's verbal blessing for this invasion, but Rodriguez scans the will copy you hand over and shakes his head methodically, explaining in even tones that emotional claims don't override legal documents and advising Jack to pursue proper channels through the courts rather than self-help moves that could lead to charges of unlawful entry. Lisa gathers the children close, her face a mask of apologetic fatigue as she murmurs something about misunderstanding family dynamics. And although a flicker of sympathy tugs at you for her position married to such a perpetual optimist in the face of reality's hard knocks, you hold firm as the officers escort the group back to their van, loading the boxes with efficient authority and promising a formal report that will serve as your first line of defense in whatever legal tangle Jack decides to weave next. Waving politely from the porch as their taillights recede into the twilight, you feel the initial rush of vindication settle into a more complex brew of relief and wariness, especially when Rodriguez lingers a moment to mention off the record that an anonymous tip had come into the station earlier that afternoon about disputed property records involving your address and a lawyer making inquiries at the county office, a detail that sends a chill unrelated to the cooling evening air because who would have known to alert them before you even raised the alarm? And as you double-lock the doors and reset the sensors for the night, the house envelopes you in its familiar creaks and shadows, leaving you to ponder whether this intrusion marks the beginning of a deeper unraveling of the fragile piece you've built or merely another chapter in the endless sibling rivalry that has defined your life since childhood. The morning after that unexpected police visit unfolded with an almost mocking serenity as sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds of my kitchen window, casting elongated shadows across the granite countertop where I perched on a stool nursing a oversized mug of black coffee strong enough to jolt the dead back to awareness, while methodically reviewing the emailed police report on my laptop screen, its dry bureaucratic language detailing the incident as a resolved trespassing attempt, complete with timestamps from my security app and Officer Rodriguez's handwritten notes on Jack's questionable handwritten note that purportedly captured Mom's dying wishes in loopy cursive scrawls, which looked more like a grocery list than a legal bombshell. I had barely finished scrolling through the attached incident log highlighting the advisory against further unauthorized access when my phone vibrated insistently on the table, pulling me from my reverie with Jack's name flashing across the display like an unwelcome sequel to the previous night's drama, so I answered with a measured tone feigning casual interest as he launched into a tirade about how the cops had overstepped their bounds, treating him like a common criminal for simply trying to reclaim what he insisted was his rightful share of the family pie, especially since Mom had always played favorites in subtle ways during their childhood squabbles over toys and attention, leaving me the dutiful older sister to clean up the messes he inevitably created. By midday, the drama escalated anew when Jack's van crunched gravel in the driveway once more, but this time he wasn't alone, emerging instead with a wiry lawyer named Mr. Hargrove, whose ill-fitting suit and polished loafers screamed of cut-rate consultations from the strip mall offices that dotted the outskirts of Dayton, where desperate folks bartered their last dollars for dreams of courtroom victories. And as they ascended the porch steps together, Jack shot me a triumphant glance through the screen door while Hargrove clutched a leather briefcase bulging with what he promised were ironclad documents to prove joint tenancy based on implied verbal agreements from Mom's hospital bedside conversations witnessed by a nurse whose affidavit they conveniently produced, though it read more like a vague recollection than sworn testimony, inviting them inside out of deference to the neighbors who had already started their daily ritual of watering plastic ferns and exchanging gossip over fences. I led them to the dining table, the same scarred oak surface, where family holidays once unfolded with laughter and arguments in equal measure, and as Hargrove spread out his papers citing obscure state statutes about equitable distribution in undivided estates, I sat across from them, absorbing the details with a poker face honed from years of negotiating real estate deals where buyers lowballed offers and sellers clung to unrealistic valuations, all the while my mind raced back to the will reading 2 years prior when the attorney had emphasized the sole bequest to me as the primary caregiver who had managed Mom's declining health from diagnosis to the end without a single weekend off, unlike Jack, who jetted in sporadically, bearing flowers that wilted faster than his promises to contribute financially. Jack leaned forward during a lull in Hargrove's legalese, his eyes pleading in that manipulative way reminiscent of the time he convinced Mom to co-sign a loan for his so-called startup that turned out to be a fleet of rusty lawnmowers he flipped for pennies on the dollar, and he murmured about Lisa's unexpected pregnancy, adding another mouth to feed amid their mounting bills from the apartment eviction and his warehouse job that paid just enough to keep the lights on but not the creditors at bay. Tugging at my sympathies even as Lisa waited in the van, visible through the window, her hand resting protectively on her abdomen, while the kids, Tommy and Sarah, tumbled out to chase fireflies in the yard, their innocent antics injecting a touch of absurd humor into the tension as Tommy accidentally knocked over a garden gnome, sending it rolling toward the street like a escaped prisoner. To defuse the immediate standoff, I proposed a tentative compromise, allowing them to store a few boxes in the detached garage for the short term pending a formal review by my own attorney, whose card I slid across the table with deliberate nonchalance, watching Hargrove's smirk fade into thoughtful scribbles on his notepad, and as they departed somewhat appeased with the garage key in Jack's pocket, I couldn't resist a parting quip about how the space flooded every spring rain, which was a harmless exaggeration born from the frustration of watching my hard-won solitude erode under the weight of his perpetual crises, yet it planted a seed of hesitation evident in the way he glanced warily at the side yard before driving off. That afternoon, driven by a gnawing need for clarity, I headed to the county recorder's office, a dimly lit bureaucratic hive buzzing with retirees and harried clerks who navigated dusty files with the efficiency of long practice, and after flashing my identification and signing the log, I delved into the property records, pulling the full dossier on the house, which revealed not just the clean title transfer from Mom's estate, but a lingering lien notice from 5 years earlier tied inexplicably to Jack's name for unpaid work on a proposed addition that never materialized, hinting at deeper financial entanglements that he had likely dragged Mom into during one of his downward spirals. Returning home as the sun dipped low, I confided in my neighbor Mr. Patel over the shared fence, his kind eyes crinkling with the wisdom of someone who had immigrated decades ago and built a life observing the neighborhood's ebb and flow, and he chuckled softly, revealing that he had overheard Jack at the local bar just last week lamenting his maxed-out credit Cards and a botched real estate flip that left him owing more than the house was worth a detail that painted Jack's intrusion not as bold entitlement, but as the desperate gambit of a man cornered by invisible chains of debt. The revelation settled over me like a thickening fog of uncertainty, prompting me to sift through Mom's archived boxes in the attic, where the air hung heavy with the scent of aged paper and forgotten mothballs, until my fingers brushed against a sealed envelope tucked behind a stack of yellowed tax returns addressed jointly to Jack and me in her familiar script, postmarked mere weeks before her passing. And as I carefully pried open the flap under the beam of my phone's flashlight, the words inside leaped out in elegant loops, speaking of protecting the family legacy from the mistakes buried in the foundation, and urging us not to let old shadows destroy what remained whole. What shadows? Did she mean the ones tied to Dad's sudden decline, or something more personal that Jack's debts had unearthed? And just as the implications began to swirl in my mind, forming a web of questions about loyalties long tested, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number warning me to stay out of it or face regrets that echoed the anonymous tip Rodriguez mentioned the night before, leaving me frozen in the dim attic light as headlights swept across the driveway, signaling Jack's unannounced return, this time accompanied by the jangle of keys and the determined stride of someone unwilling to take no for an answer. In a flash of witty retaliation, before they could knock, I pulled up a real estate listing site on my laptop and posted the house for sale, describing it in vivid detail as a charming fixer-upper with a quirky haunted history, complete with creaking floors and unexplained cold spots, the kind of tongue-in-cheek embellishment that would spook any realtor Jack might contact for his own schemes. And sure enough, within minutes his phone rang from the porch, a frantic call from his contact pulling out of a potential rental deal, laughing off the spectral rumors that now tainted the property's appeal, giving me that satisfying twinge of revenge wrapped in humor, even as the door rattled with their insistent pounding, drawing me inexorably toward the next confrontation. The insistent pounding on the front door that evening carried the weight of unresolved grudges as I descended the attic stairs, clutching Mom's enigmatic letter in one hand and my phone in the other, its screen still aglow from the hasty haunted house listing that had already begun to circulate through local realtor networks, potentially derailing any underhanded plans Jack might have cooked up to leverage the property for his own gain. And as I approached the entryway, the silhouettes of Jack and that locksmith loomed distorted through the frosted glass panel like figures from a low-budget thriller where the protagonist always hesitates just long enough to invite trouble inside. Peering through the peephole to confirm their unwelcome duo, I felt a flicker of that dark humor rising unbidden at the sight of the locksmith's toolkit glinting under the porch light, a ridiculous prop for what was essentially a family feud over square footage and sentiment rather than some high-stakes heist. So I cracked the door just wide enough to deliver a firm refusal, emphasizing that the garage key came with no implied access to the main house and certainly not to any locks I hadn't personally authorized, while Jack shifted his weight impatiently behind the man, his face a storm cloud of frustration mixed with the desperation that had defined his adult life ever since he dropped out of community college to chase get-rich-quick schemes that invariably left him deeper in the hole. The locksmith backed off with a muttered apology about not signing up for domestic disputes, but Jack pressed forward undeterred, launching into a heated rant about how I was turning the family home into a fortress against bloodkin, citing Mom's letter as if he had read its cryptic warnings about buried mistakes and protective legacies, which of course he hadn't, since the envelope had only just surfaced in my hands, prompting me to wave it under his nose in a moment of impulsive confrontation, revealing snippets of her plea not to let old shadows consume what remained of their shared history. His eyes widened at the sight of the paper, the color draining from his cheeks as realization dawned that Mom had hidden more than just sentimental trinkets in the attic, and in that charged instant on the porch with the neighborhood crickets chirping their indifferent chorus, he exploded with accusations that I had always been the golden child hoarding the inheritance while he scraped by on warehouse wages, barely covering the gambling debts he finally admitted to racking up at the VFW poker tables, where buddies turned into bookies and one bad hand snowballed into threats from collectors who made late-night calls that kept Lisa awake with worry. The confession hung between us, raw and unfiltered, stripping away the facade of temporary hardship to expose the chronic self-sabotage that had strained their marriage and now threatened to engulf my hard-earned stability just as Lisa pulled up in the van, the headlights cutting through the dusk like accusatory beams illuminating the kids' sleepy faces pressed against the windows, and she hurried over her steps, faltering as she caught the tail end of Jack's outburst, pleading with me in a voice thick with exhaustion and quiet terror to reconsider letting them crash in the basement for a few weeks, because the new baby on the way compounded their plight, and turning them away felt like abandoning kin in their hour of need, a dilemma that twisted my resolve even as I recalled the countless times I had extended olive branches only to watch them snap under his weight. Viewers might judge me harshly for the cold edge in my response as I shook my head and closed the door on their appeals, citing the will's clarity and my own need for peace after years of caregiving solitude, but in that moment the uncertainty gnawed at me, wondering if my boundaries were armor or just another layer of isolation, echoing Mom's warnings about mistakes that bound rather than freed. And as they retreated to the van with Jack muttering threats of legal escalation, I retreated inside to pore over the letter by the soft glow of the living room lamp, its words weaving a tapestry of regret tied to the summer of 1998 when Dad's auto shop folded amid whispers of missing funds and family complicity that we had all buried to preserve the illusion of normalcy. Sleep proved elusive that night, the house settling around me with creaks that mimicked footsteps on the stairs until around 2 in the morning the security app chimed softly, alerting me to motion at the back entrance, where the camera feed revealed Jack's shadowy form fumbling with a slim tool against the doorframe, his determination fueled by whatever desperation the confrontation had ignited, and rather than summon the police immediately, I activated the improvised trap I had rigged earlier that weak, a motion-triggered sprinkler system borrowed from the garden center and modified with a timer to unleash a frigid deluge calibrated for maximum discomfort without harm, drenching him in a sudden Arctic cascade that sent him sprawling across the slick patio stones, his startled yelp captured in crystal clarity on the recording as he scrambled to his feet, water streaming from his clothes like a defeated cartoon character. Come dawn, with the footage saved securely, I couldn't suppress a wry chuckle at the absurdity of it all, my brother reduced to a soggy intruder in what should have been a dignified standoff, so channeling that witty satisfaction into action, I anonymously forwarded select clips to the creditors whose numbers Jack had let slip during his tirade, using a disposable email to tip them off about his recent van sightings and warehouse shifts, ensuring they would tighten the noose on his finances without my name attached to the fallout, a clever revenge that left him squirming under mounting pressure, while I sipped coffee and watched the ripples spread through subtle inquiries from his workplace about reliability issues. Yet even as the triumph settled, a deeper unease stirred, because tucked into the letter's folds I discovered an old photograph slipped between the pages, showing Mom and Dad in their younger days, arm in arm with two unfamiliar faces, a sharply dressed man and a poised woman posing in front of this very house, stirring what looked like a celebratory toast, the kind that hinted at alliances beyond blood. And as I zoomed in on the details under better light, the man's features stirred a vague recognition tied to Dad's old business partner, Uncle Vic, whose name surfaced in hushed family lore connected to the shop's downfall, leaving me to wonder if Jack had deleted this image from his own copies of Mom's effects, and why the timing of his intrusion coincided with someone digging into those long-buried ties, just as my phone buzzed with an email from Hargrove attaching a scanned version of that exact photo, now circulating in legal channels with annotations questioning its implications for inheritance claims. That email from Hargrove landed in my inbox like a digital landmine the morning after Jack's midnight drenching, forcing me to confront the photo's eerie duplication as I sat at the kitchen table with a cooling cup of tea, steam curling lazily toward the ceiling, while the implications of those four figures frozen in time outside the house's faded siding began to unravel, threads I had long assumed were securely tucked away in the recesses of family history, especially since the annotation scrawled in red ink by some paralegal suggested the image served as evidence for claims of co-ownership tied to verbal promises Mom might have made during her final lucid moments, leaving me to scroll through the attachments, repeatedly zooming in on the man's face that Matched Uncle Vic's from Dad's old shop photos, the one who vanished after the 1998 scandal with whispers of forged documents and skimmed insurance payouts that nearly bankrupted the family before Dad's heart gave out under the strain. Jack's voicemails piled up throughout the day, each more insistent than the last, culminating in a group text to the extended family chain pulling in our cousin Rita with her endless optimism, and Aunt Marlene, the self-appointed matriarch who still hosted Easter brunches in her sprawling colonial across town, and by evening they had orchestrated what they dubbed a mediation dinner at my own table, turning the space I cherished for solitary meals into a battlefield of forced civility as Rita arrived. First bearing a foil-wrapped tuna casserole that filled the air with briny aromas, while Marlene followed with her signature apple pie still warm from the oven and judgmental glances at the minimalist decor I had curated post-divorce to reflect my newfound independence, free from the clutter of shared lives. Jack and Lisa pulled in last, the van groaning under the weight of unspoken tensions, with the kids trailing behind, clutching homemade cards scrawled with pleas for Grandma's house to stay in the family, a manipulative touch that tugged at heartstrings even as I set extra places with gritted teeth, determined not to let the evening devolve into outright war, though the undercurrent of alliance building was palpable in the way Marlene cornered me by the sink, murmuring about blood being thicker than solicitors' fees, and how hoarding the property smacked of selfishness in an era when adult children like Jack struggled with stagnant wages and ballooning costs for everything from daycare to dental work. The dinner unfolded with strained small talk, Rita steering conversations toward neutral ground like neighborhood gossip and the latest school fundraisers, but tension simmered beneath the surface, bubbling over when Marlene pivoted to Dad's legacy, praising his work ethic, while subtly implying that moms will overlook the sacrifices Jack made by sticking around Dayton instead of chasing city dreams like I had briefly during my real estate climb, only to return humbled by market crashes and personal setbacks. And as plates cleared, Jack seized the moment, sliding the photo across the table, claiming it proved a deeper family stake with Uncle Vic as a silent partner in the home's original purchase, a revelation that drew gasps from Rita and a knowing nod from Marlene, who admitted to vague memories of Vic's visits laden with briefcases and big talk about expanding the shop into real estate ventures. Lisa hovered on the periphery, her face pale under the chandelier's glow, until she pulled me into the pantry under pretense of fetching napkins, her whisper urgent and laced with shame as she confessed that Jack's rages had escalated, with the debts turning what started as heated arguments into shoves that left bruises hidden under long sleeves, and pleas for me to intervene, not by opening the door, but by helping her gather evidence for a quiet separation, because the new pregnancy amplified her fears of raising the children in that volatile cycle, a confidence that fractured my defenses, making me see her not as an accomplice in the invasion, but as another victim of Jack's endless downward pull. And yet, as she slipped back to the table, I wrestled with the dilemma of extending aid at the cost of my sanctuary, wondering if viewers would brand me heartless for prioritizing self-preservation over sisterly solidarity in a world where women like us often bore the emotional labor alone. The photo's full twist emerged amid dessert when Rita examined it closely under the lamp, her finger tracing the woman's outline and recalling a long-buried story about Vic's wife who had co-signed loans for the shop only to accuse the family of theft when funds went missing in 1998, a scheme where Jack at 18 had forged Dad's signature on insurance claims, and I, in a misguided bid to protect him, had vouched for the paperwork during the audit, nearly costing us everything. And as the room erupted in accusations, alliances splintered, with Marlene defending Jack's youthful folly as a symptom of Dad's poor guidance, while Rita turned to me, eyes wide with betrayal, demanding why I had never spoken of my complicity, leaving me exposed in the hot seat of collective judgment for choices made in the fog of adolescent loyalty that now circled back to haunt this inheritance fight. Seizing the chaos, I excused myself, feigning an urgent call, and from the hallway crafted a forged settlement email using a spoofed address, mimicking Hargrove's firm, offering Jack a clean lien release in exchange for digitally waiving all claims, the document laced with ironic clauses about preserving family harmony through prompt action. And as I hit send, watching him pull out his phone in the living room, the trap sprung when he clicked through without scrutiny, binding him to terms that funneled any future disputes into my favor, a witty revenge that elicited a suppressed laugh from me at his oblivious eagerness, even as guilt gnawed for exploiting the past against him in a way that felt both satisfying and morally murky. Yet the evening's fractures deepened when Marlene stormed out decrying the toxicity, and Rita texted later with apologies, tinged with doubt about my methods, leaving the house echoing with unresolved echoes until midnight brought a sharp knock from Officers Rodriguez and Ellis, their faces stern under the porch light as they brandished a warrant for records inspection revealing tampering in the county files that pointed fingers toward internal family sabotage and demanded to know who had accessed the liens last. The officers' unexpected midnight arrival with that warrant in hand transformed my living room into an impromptu evidence room as Rodriguez methodically flipped through the stack of property files I had gathered on the coffee table, their pages rustling under the harsh beam of a portable lamp, while Ellis paced the perimeter jotting notes on a pad that captured every detail from the tampered lien dates to the digital timestamps on my security footage, all of which pointed toward someone inside the family circle who had accessed the county records under false pretenses, perhaps in a bid to muddy the ownership waters and force a hasty settlement before the full weight of the inheritance claims could be dissected in court, leaving me to recount the dinner's chaos from earlier that evening, including Jack's hasty signing of the forged email and Lisa's whispered confessions about the bruises and the mounting fear that gripped her with every late-night creditor call. Rodriguez's mustache twitched with skepticism as he probed deeper into the 1998 scandal, drawing parallels to the current discrepancies where the altered documents mirrored the forged insurance papers from back then, suggesting a pattern of familial deception that had outlived Dad's passing and now threatened to drag Mom's legacy through the mud of renewed investigations, while Ellis interjected with questions about Uncle Vic's widow still operating her so-called consulting firm out of a sun-bleached office in Florida, peddling advice on disputed estates to desperate heirs, much like Jack, who had funneled payments from the USB drive statements to her account in a desperate bid to silence any resurfacing claims tied to the original theft that we had all conspired to bury under layers of silence and selective memory. Handing over the drive with its incriminating trails of withdrawals and coded memos, I felt the weight of complicity settle heavier than ever, because admitting my role in vouching for those youthful forgeries meant unraveling the narrative I had built of myself as the steadfast guardian of the home earned through selfless caregiving, while Jack embodied the reckless opportunist whose gambling and get-rich schemes had eroded the family's foundations long before Mom's illness cast its shadow. Yet, as the officers pieced together how the Ponzi elements from Vic's scheme had looped back through hidden debts Mom accrued to cover Dad's shortfalls, I realized the intrusion wasn't mere sibling rivalry, but a frantic scramble to contain the explosion of truths that could expose us all to fraud charges and civil suits that would strip away not just the house, but the fragile illusions of our shared past. They departed around 3 in the morning with assurances of hauling Jack in for questioning the next day, leaving the house cloaked in an oppressive quiet broken only by the distant hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. And as I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion warring with adrenaline, I couldn't shake the dilemma Lisa's plight presented, because exposing Jack fully might free her from his rages, but at the cost of orphaning the kids in a web of legal fallout that echoed the instability of our own childhood after Dad's shop collapsed, forcing Mom to take double shifts at the diner to keep the lights on. Dawn broke with a vengeance, Jack's van screeching into the driveway unannounced, his face gaunt and wild-eyed as he burst through the unlocked back door, waving a crumpled printout from Hargrove about an out-of-court offer to split the property 50-50 in exchange for dropping the tampering complaints, a desperate ploy born from the anonymous tips that had accelerated the police scrutiny. And as we squared off in the living room, the very spot where his initial announcement had ignited this firestorm, he collapsed into a chair, spilling the full confession in sobs that mixed regret with defiance, admitting how the debts stemmed from payoffs to Vic's widow to bury evidence of Mom's secret loans used to bail out the family during the scandal where he had skimmed the insurance, and I had turned a blind eye, signing off to shield us from scandal that ultimately broke Dad's spirit and hastened his end. Emotions churned within me, a toxic brew of pity for the brother who once shared scraped knees and backyard adventures, rage at how his selfishness had invaded my refuge, and a dawning horror that my own silences had enabled the cycle, leaving viewers to grapple with the morality of my impending choice. As I revealed the settlement emails trap, the one where his eager click had waived all claims in perpetuity, funneling the liens back to him alone, a clever twist laced with ironic humor, because in his haste to escape the noose he had tightened it around his own neck, granting me unassailable control over the deed, while his finances crumbled under the weight of exposed transactions that Hargrove could no longer spin into joint burdens. Yet, even as I watched him further crumpling the printout in defeat, I held back the nuclear option, withholding the full handover of the USB to the police, and instead anonymously leaked select redacted statements to the family chain, prompting Rita and Marlene to bombard him with calls of outrage that isolated him further without utterly destroying the father figure for Tommy and Sarah, a measured revenge that satisfied the itch for justice, but left a bitter aftertaste of mercy tinged with self-interest, because sparing him total ruin meant carrying the ambiguity of our shared guilt into whatever fragile peace remained. Days blurred into a tense resolution, with the police wrapping their probe on lesser charges of document mishandling that Jack negotiated down through a plea, leaving the house securely mine, yet echoing with unanswered echoes, like who originated that first anonymous tip to Rodriguez. Was it Lisa plotting her escape, Vic's widow circling for one last score, or even Aunt Marlene hedging her bets in the family drama? And as I sit here now, keys jingling in my pocket, contemplating whether to reinforce the security or simply sell the place and start fresh in some anonymous condo far from Dayton's tangled roots, the uncertainty lingers as a constant companion, prompting reflections on whether true revenge lies in victory or in the isolation that follows when forgiveness remains just out of reach, a thought-provoking void where the home's walls whisper of legacies both preserved and poisoned forever.